Ethics in research. Ethics in research is important as it provides researchers with ethical principles or guidelines for the successful conduct of research. But first, what is ethics? Broadly defined, ethics is the morality of a human act. By morality, we mean the rightness or wrongness of a human act. Practically speaking, ethics is concerned with what is good for the people and the society as a whole. Thus, ethics really matters because it urges us to do good to others and take responsibility of what we do. In research, ethics provides guidelines for the responsible conduct of research. Moreover, ethics allows researchers and scholars to further educate themselves and monitor their activities in the conduct of research so as to ensure a high ethical standard. Now, it must be noted that aside from the fact that researchers must ensure that research subjects or participants are not placed in harm's way, they need to be reminded that they have the moral obligation to provide maximum benefits to the participants. This means that researchers need not think only of their own interest while they conduct the research. It is for this reason that researchers must be guided by ethical principles in the conduct of the research to maintain research integrity and avoid research misconduct. As we can see, there are acceptable and unacceptable conduct of research, especially when humans and animals are involved. Needless to say, research misconduct can lead to dire consequences if ignored. Ethical principles that guide research. Honesty. Researchers ought to honestly report data and results of the study, including the methods and procedures employed in data gathering, as well as publication status. Thus, researchers should not falsify, fabricate, and misrepresent data and results. Objectivity. Researchers should uphold objectivity and scientific rigor at all times. Thus, researchers should strive to avoid all forms of bias in research, such as bias in experimental design, data analysis and interpretation, peer review process, grant writing, and other facets of research. Confidentiality. Researchers should always uphold the principle of confidentiality. One way of effectively doing this is to protect confidential communications, such as papers or grants submitted for publications, patient records, and the like. Competence. Researchers are supposed to be knowledgeable and experts in their own discipline or field of specialization. In short, researchers should be competent scholars. Thus, they ought to maintain and improve their professional competence and expertise through lifelong education and learning. More importantly, they ought to take steps to promote competence in science. Integrity. Researchers ought to keep their promises and honor agreements, such as agreements with donors and research participants. Thus, researchers need to strive for consistency in thought and action. Legality. Research always has a legal dimension. Thus, researchers ought to obey laws and relevant institutional and governmental policies. Maturity and openness. Knowledge is supposed to be free. Hence, researchers must willingly share data, results, ideas, and resources. They must also be open to constructive criticisms and new ideas. Respect for intellectual property. Researchers ought to honor copyrights, patents, and other forms of intellectual property. Thus, they should not use methods, data, and results owned by other researchers or scholars without permission or proper acknowledgement. More importantly, Researchers should avoid plagiarism at all times. Responsible publication. Researchers need to publish in order to advance knowledge and scholarships, and not just advance one's own career. They also need to avoid wasteful publication, such as publishing in predatory journals and duplicative publication. Non-discrimination. Researchers ought to avoid all forms of discrimination against colleagues and students on the basis of sex, race, ethnicity, and other factors that are related to scientific competence and integrity. For this reason, researchers ought to respect their colleagues and treat them fairly. Senior researchers also need to help educate, mentor, and advise students. Senior researchers, therefore, have to promote the welfare of their students and allow them to make their own decisions. Human subjects protection. Researchers should respect human dignity, privacy, and autonomy at all times. When conducting research on human subjects, researchers should take precautionary measures to minimize, if not completely avoid, harms and risks. They also need to maximize the benefits that participants may get from the results of the study. For instance, if a researcher discovers a cure for a particular disease through her research on indigenous plants, a reasonable part of the patent should go to the indigenous community or communities where the plants are located. Social responsibility. As already emphasized, researchers should conduct research not only for the advancement of their own career, but for the good of society as a whole. Thus, researchers should strive to promote social good and mitigate social harms.
Consider this scenario. You find a wallet filled with money. Do you keep it, or do you bring it to your local police station? This situation might be easy to solve, but researchers often face more complex ethical dilemmas. In addition to knowing what research is, it's also important to ask what good research is. Is it only empirical, reproducible, and valid, or should it also be ethical? Ethics are moral principles that guide how we determine right and wrong, whereas laws are codified rules people must follow to maintain social order. Ethics are the norms of conduct people should follow to promote ideal human character and behavior. By following ethical guidelines, we act in a way that is good instead of bad. We use ethical principles every day without realizing it, when returning a lost wallet or taking responsibility for a mistake instead of blaming someone else. In academia, plagiarism, cheating, and fabrication of information are examples of unethical behavior. Ethical standards are not universally agreed upon, leading to different answers to the same problem. The entire research process relies on ethics, from what we decide to study and how research is conducted to how participants are treated and how contributions are cited. Ethics are even important when examining the sources of funding. Even though ethical standards can vary by region, discipline, or institution, there are common themes that determine what makes research ethical. Being honest, transparent, and respecting confidentiality and intellectual property are some examples. Different organizations often have their own codes of ethics. For example, the World Economic Forum Young Scientists community lists 7 key principles for achieving ethical research. Who decides what is ethical and what is unethical? In academia and industry, ethics committees are responsible for reviewing research proposals, monitoring their implementation, and following up on their results. Committees have the authority to approve, reject, halt, or modify studies if they determine the research to be unethical. These committees consist of people from different backgrounds, scientists and non-scientists alike, to offer different perspectives on ethics. There are different types of committees depending on whom or what is involved in the study. Committees make ethical decisions based on certain principles. For research with human subjects, the Institutional Review Board uses the Belmont Report as the foundation for its decisions. The Belmont Report, created in 1974, lists 3 key principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. By putting the principles of the Belmont Report into action, the Institutional Review Board considers informed consent to make sure participants understand what they are asked to do for the study, evaluates the potential risks compared to the potential benefits, and judges that the selection of participants is fair, with special protections for vulnerable populations. While there are ethical guidelines in place, unethical research can still happen in any discipline. The Piltdown Man, one of the most famous frauds in archaeology, was accepted as the missing evolutionary link between apes and early humans for decades. However, the remains were actually from 2 known species, filed and stained to look like a new one. This dishonesty discredited accurate findings of early human remains in Asia and Africa, delaying the process of understanding human history. Another example, the Tuskegee experiment, was designed to study the effects of syphilis in black men without their informed consent. Even after penicillin became a known cure for the disease, researchers did not provide adequate treatment to their participants, who eventually died or experienced severe, long-term health problems as a result of syphilis. Finally, the Monster Study was conducted at the University of Iowa to find a cause or cure for stuttering. 22 orphan children who were unaware that they were participants in this study were given either positive speech therapy, which included praise, reassurance, and encouragement, or negative speech therapy, which included belittlement and immediate criticism. Some of the children who received negative speech therapy retained speech problems throughout their lives. There are different reasons why unethical research occurs. It may be motivated by a desire for recognition and fame, to get a project done quickly, to publish a finding first, or to climb up the academic ladder. Prejudices and biases may also lead to ethical violations. Public mistrust of science, harm to individuals, loss of funding, and even the loss of jobs are some of the consequences of unethical research. While some of the effects of unethical research can't be undone, actions have been taken to prevent unethical research from happening in the future.